What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. This is the college basketball Sweet 16 betting preview. I'm Stuckey, joining me today are my co-hosts, Mike Calabrese and BJ Cunningham. 16 left, gentlemen. Mike, you're rocking the horns gear. That's not very supportive of our two remaining futures for the podcast, but how's it going, brother?
It's going good. I also have a UT future. I think it's probably the most realistic to come in with Creighton kind of sitting there as well. It's good. I'm feeling a lot better. You know, the weekends, as I mentioned on our Monday recap, I got slapped around a little bit. I basically could not pull a winner from anything over the weekend. Now I'm filled with optimism. I'm looking at these 8 games Thursday and Friday. There's a lot to like. I think there's some contrarian plays out there. There's some overreaction. You mentioned it with some of the recency bias where you can get wrapped into like one good win. All of a sudden, that's who the team truly is. And their resume for 3.5 months was fraudulent. So I think there's some interesting angles here. There's some great storylines. The K-State, Michigan State game, it's like a New York City homecoming for both guards. I think that's really cool. Just in general, I'm excited for these games. And honestly, we talk about this a decent amount just from an overall narrative arc where it's like the first weekend is for the Cinderellas and the second weekend, let's like push towards finding who's the actual top team in college basketball from a year where we've basically been lamenting the fact that there has not been a reliable top team. So someone's going to emerge. Someone's going to be playing their best basketball headed into the Final Four weekends. I'm excited to find out who that is.
Yes, sir. Well said. BJ, Iowa, not in the second weekend, but you're used to that. How's it going?
Yeah,
brother?
obviously used to that. It's never happened in my lifetime. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I'm feeling good. You know, I'm like Mike, I'm filled with optimism here. I think what's kind of interesting and funny is the whole season we said, hey, there's no good team in college basketball. You can't trust anybody. And that's kind of how it played out in the first 2 rounds. So now we get into the second round where I don't know if I trust Houston. Like, you know, obviously Alabama is breezed by their 2 opponents, but they've got a couple really difficult tests coming up. Could Princeton be the second straight team in 2 years in a row, 15 seed to make the Elite Eight? Who knows? So I'm very excited to see how this all shakes out.
All right, well, let's get into it. We're going to go through all 8 games, 4 on Thursday, 4 on Friday. Make sure you check out Big Bets on Campus live, also 10:30 a.m. Eastern every day of the weekend, or at least Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But let's start things off we'll go chronologically, obviously. We'll start Thursday night with that New York guard matchup, 6:30 Eastern on TBS. By the way, love the fact that we are now starting the first game at 6:30. We're staggering them more, not 7:10, 7:29 like before. We're starting at 6:30 with the second one at 7:15. So you got a little less overlap. I completely agree with this decision to do that. So well done to the CBS executive team, whoever was making that decision. Anyway, Michigan State 2-point favorite here. They did open as an underdog, over under 137.5. This game will be played in the world's most famous arena at Madison Square Garden. Mike, you mentioned this matchup already. Curious to get your thoughts here first. Battle of the New York guards, really what good coaching matchup. One, will coach with much more experience, with 2 coaches I highly respect here. Good guards in the Garden, feels right. What do you see here?
So obviously, I think this is a hat tip to Izzo. He's got 54 tournament wins. I think he'll go down as arguably the greatest tournament coach to ever live. So he certainly gets the best out of his teams, and that's true of this run as well. Holding USC to 62 points, that was 10 points below their season average. Holding Marquette to 60, which was 19 points below their season average. My thought, though, is it a little bit overblown because of the basketball elements? The actual Wilson ball that they were playing with, how much can be attributed to that? Also, you brought up on Monday, Kolek was hurt for Marquette. So I think the market's a little bit overextended in terms of how highly they think of Michigan State at this point. I have this more as a coin flip. I think where it opens, I think is more accurate. So I'm going to play the little bit of value that I believe is baked into this line, K-State on the money line. I love the way that Noel's playing, at the point. And Keontae Johnson as well is someone who can go off potentially for 20 points. And one thing I want to bring up about their big is that he played some of his best basketball in their biggest games against their toughest opponents. When you look at how he played against Kansas, how he played against Texas, he had some really big scoring outbursts. That's what's going to be required here. It can't just be on the K-State backcourt. So I'm going to go ahead and lean to the Wildcat money line here.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in this Kansas State team. I faded them the first 2 rounds without success, unfortunately, especially with Kentucky. But I graded their first game as an 8-point win. I mean, Montana State, excellent free throw shooting team, couldn't make a free throw. And obviously couldn't make an open three, but they're not a great free throw. They're not a good 3-point shooting team. Then you played Kentucky. Antonio Reeves starts out 0 of 12 from the field. Pretty tough, but I graded that as a 1-point win for Kentucky. So wasn't too upset with either play. But I agree. Like I make Michigan State here a small favorite. Like I still have Kansas State as the 27th best team in the country, and they're outside the top 25. They're 345th nationally still in Haslametrics away from home metric. I still don't trust them away from Manhattan. And Michigan State's playing its best basketball of the year ever since that Iowa meltdown. Really, They've seemed to have rallied and they're peaking at the right time, but I just make them a tiny small favorite. So I can't play them -2 here. I do think that there'll be a lot of runs in this game. So I'll be looking, just 2 excellent backcourts. You're going to see like Noel get hot for a stretch. You'll see Walker get hot for a stretch. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple, 8 to 10-0 spurts either way. So I'll be looking to see if I can get Michigan State live as a nice small to medium sized underdog. I just trust them to make more shots. They're a better shooting team, but and look, they want to slow the game down, but they'll attack in transition when warranted. And if they do so, which I think they will, they'll have success. Kansas State's transition defense is a bit vulnerable, but ultimately, Michigan State wants to slow the game down. Kansas State wants to get up and down and run. I tend to trust those teams that want to slow it down more, especially in the tournament in general, but especially as we get later in the rounds. And, but then again, like Kansas State, their 3, biggest weaknesses is, on the defensive glass, they can be turned over and they will foul a lot. But Michigan State, partly by design, doesn't really get after the offensive glass because they want to get back, prevent you from running. They don't really get to the line and they don't turn you over. So can Michigan State exploit the 3 primary weaknesses of this Kansas State team? I'm not sure. But I think Michigan State's going to win this game, but I don't see any value to. I'm going to be looking live. BJ, the Soul. Yeah, another thing is where everyone's hyping this Michigan State team. And it's like, well, look at what the rest of the Big Ten did. So that's the other side of the coin. The Big Ten has obviously not looked strong, with Michigan State being the lone team left. So, BJ, any faith in the one final member of your conference?
Yes and no. Like, I tend to agree with you. I think the line is settled right around where it should be. The thing about Kansas State is they're shooting the ball insanely well from inside the arc through their first 2 games against Kentucky and Montana State, who are very good 2-point defenses. They shot 49 of 73 from inside the arc. That's 67%. That's insane. They cannot, I believe they cannot keep that up over the course of this tournament. Michigan State does an unbelievable job preventing you to get to the rim. Only 30% of the opponent's shots against Michigan State this season have been at the rim, and against USC, they only allowed 18 points at the rim. Then against Marquette, they only allowed 14 points at the rim. So you're taking away essentially one of Kansas State's biggest advantages. And Michigan State, they're very mid-range and post-up reliant, which, Kansas State has done a very good job defending mid-range jumpers. They're not very good defending in the post. And then the flip side, you mentioned the 3 weaknesses for Kansas State and Michigan State not really being able to exploit them. Michigan State has one of the highest 3-point percentages in the country, but they have a very, very low 3-point rate. And Kansas State is obviously a very good 3-point defense. So, yeah, I think this line is probably settled right around where it should be. But, yeah, I think I'll probably be looking to get in live potentially on Michigan State because I don't think Kansas State can keep up shooting this hot from inside the arc.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the second game starting at 7:15 Eastern on CBS between Arkansas and Connecticut. Connecticut is a 3.5-point favorite over under 140. Ultimately, these are 2 elite defenses, both top 15 adjusted defensive efficiency. but the one weak unit by far is the Arkansas offense, specifically their shooting and just ability to score over stretches. And I think that's ultimately going to be the difference when you're playing elite teams later in the tournament. If you have one glaring weak area, it tends to get exposed, and I think that's the case here. So I like the Huskies. Mike, you agree?
I agree. At this point, I think UConn is the advanced metrics darling of this tournament. Evan Maya, shot quality, Ken Pom, all have them rated as the fourth best team in the country. I think it's well deserved given how elite they are on the glass. And I'm glad you brought up their turnovers, because if they turn it over 15 times and Arkansas gets their running game going, gets easy transition buckets at the rim, they'll be able to smooth out some of those lulls that they're going to go on offensively. But when you look at UConn, in the last 4 games, they only have one performance where they had over 9 turnovers. So if they don't beat themselves, and they also can turn to Jordan Hawkins, who's finally out of his shooting slump. He's shooting 50% from 3. He's canned 7 threes in 2 games for the Huskies. I think it's a reason why they won, going away from a really tough St. Mary's team, a tough team to beat by as many points as they did. I think that's a good indication of where they're headed, as you mentioned, playing their best basketball at the right time. I think this is the end of the road for Arkansas, and both you and I were on them to upset Kansas, and that's how we had it in our bracket, and this is where I have them getting off the train. So I think this is the right time to back UConn. I'll lay the points.
Keep your shirt on, Muss. Sorry, Colin. BJ?
Yeah, I agree. Let's make it. Yep, I'll make it 3 for 3. If you look at Arkansas, they do three things elite offensively. They are top 40 in the country in points per possession at the rim. They get to the free throw line at an incredibly high rate, and they're very, very good in transition, like you guys already mentioned. UConn, the one worry here is they allow teams to get the free throw line at a pretty high rate, but they are incredibly good in defending in both transition and at the rim. So if you force Arkansas to take a bunch of jump shots, something they're not comfortable doing, it's going to be very, very difficult for them. And Arkansas defensively, they've been really good at defending the 3-point line, but I still have question marks about, obviously them playing in the SEC for the whole season and then also switching the ball right before the tournament started. So are they an elite 3-point defense, or did they just be in a bad conference and the ball switched before the NCAA tournament? I don't know if we know the answer to that question yet, but Kansas only attempted 13 3-pointers against them, but the game against Illinois in the first round, Illinois had 8 open 3-pointers and just could not hit any of them. UConn is a high volume 3-point shooting team. It's kind of what's, shot them out of games at times this season. They are hitting over 36% on the season, and they got hot against St. Mary's, which ultimately led them to the victory. But a lot of 3-pointers means a lot of long rebounds. And that's why, UConn is, obviously have a ton of size, but they're second in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. Arkansas only allowed 10 total offensive rebounds through the first 2 games. They're coming into the tournament, they were outside the top 100 in defensive rebounding percentage. So I think some variance maybe went their way. Some balls bounced their way a little bit to get that low of an offensive rebounding allowed number. So I'm with you guys. I like UConn in this matchup. I think they can defend Arkansas in the 2 areas that they're elite at offensively.
Hopefully we don't have to see shirtless Muss. Yeah. All right. I'll have to mute Colin on Twitter if they go to the Elite 8 again. All right. Moving on to the late night slate on Thursday. We'll start with another SEC team, Tennessee, -5.5 against Florida Atlantic, over under 130.5. I can tell you, I played Florida Atlantic +5.5 here. You still see some recency bias, I think, late in the year. Last week, everyone wanted to fade Tennessee, calling them fraudulent, which I have for a while. And then they won that game against Duke, kind of just bullied them. And then everyone said Tennessee's legit. They are a true national title contender because of one game. And I think because of that, this line is a touch high. And I think if they didn't play that Duke game, this line, and these 2 teams just played last week, this line would be like 3.5. So I gladly took the 5.5 here. And I think that this Florida Atlantic team, look, they're great. Look, how Florida Atlantic plays, they do have a 7-footer in the middle, but around him, they'll usually play 4 out. And they have all 4 guys on the team can shoot. And this is a team that shoots the 3 at a top 50 rate and makes the 3 at a top 50 percentage nationally. And that's what you need to do against Tennessee, you got to move the ball well, which Florida Atlantic could do. They're very deep too. And you have to hit threes. There's a reason why Tennessee this year, they were number 1 in the country in 3-point defense, 26.4%, but they allowed a 3-point attempt rate that was 312th nationally. So you're going to get threes up against them, and you got to make them. So this goes back to your point, BJ, with Tennessee playing in the SEC, and then they play Duke. Duke's not a good 3-point shooting team. If I think a great comparison for who Florida Atlantic is, for what's on Tennessee's schedule, is Missouri. Missouri also shoots and makes a high volume threes. They swept Tennessee this year. They scored 86 and 79 in both games. And Missouri is a much worse defense and a horrendous rebounding team. And Florida Atlantic's really good on the boards on both ends. They'll compete here, which is important. So I was like, okay, let's break this Tennessee conference schedule down against the only 4 teams in the SEC. And remember, the SEC as a conference shot 32% from 3. That was during league play. That was last in the entire country. Only 4 teams shot above 33% during league play, which is horrendous. But that was Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Tennessee went 2-5 against those teams, and those teams shot 52 of 152 from 3, 34.2%. Against all the others, so the teams who cannot shoot a lick, Tennessee went 10-3 and held those opponents to 72 of 281 from 3, 25.5%. So it's the teams like Arkansas, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, all the teams that couldn't shoot. That's where this percentage is coming from. Well, Florida Atlantic can shoot. I think people are sleeping on this Owls team, a little too high on Tennessee and the flavor of the week after that Duke win. And I'm just comfortable fading this Tennessee team, which still is limited on offense, especially without Ziegler. They're laying a medium-sized number in the tournament against a good team. Happily took the dog here. Mike, I know you've been planning the Tennessee funeral for the last 2 games. You're wearing orange today, but it's not the Tennessee orange. Are you planning it once again?
We'll go to the third page in the hymnal here for my eulogy on Tennessee. Listen, they finished the season 5-4 straight up, coming into, including those 2 wins over Louisiana and Duke. So it's not like they were red hot. So I agree there's recency bias. 4-6 against the spread in their last 10 games as a favorite of 4 points or more. And I agree. I think the general narrative on mid-majors at this point in the tournament is, that they're probably out of their depth. But when you look at FAU, they're top 35 in Ken Pom O and D. I don't see them getting bullied inside in the same way that Duke was. Duke looked like they were leaving the boxing ring. Like as soon as Filipowski got bloodied, I think it was just a situation where a young Duke team was not prepared for that level of physicality. FAU will be. And then finally, the kill shot metric, which I love, Evan Maya, putting it out there. They have the most 10-0 runs of any team left in the field. So to be able to cover a number like this in any, way, shape, or form where you feel comfortable down the stretch, Tennessee's got to be winning by 10, 12 points. I don't see that with what they have offensively. I think this is going to be a very physical game. I think it's going to be low scoring. And the fact that you have a team that can go on a run and orchestrate a comeback, I think that leaves the back door open the whole way. So I'll go with the Owls plus the points as well.
PJ, quickly, you agree? You making a consensus here?
Yeah, I agree. All the points, I basically had my notes. One thing I'll say about, the recency bias point is that, yes, it was a very impressive performance against Duke. But if you just go back the game before that against Louisiana, Tennessee put up 0.87 points per possession and turned the ball over 18 times against the Louisiana team that was 9th in the Sun Belt in adjusted defensive efficiency. Essentially what happened against Duke is they got hot from 3. They went 9 of 21. The game before that, they didn't shoot the ball very well from 3-point range. And Tennessee actually is kind of a high volume 3-point shooting team. Like they're a little over 40% 3-point rate on the season, but they're obviously not hitting a very high percentage. So I agree with you guys. I think this is a great matchup here for Florida Atlantic and Tennessee. They're an incredible ball movement team as well. They're second in the country in assist-to-made field goal percentage. Florida Atlantic is second defensively in that category. So I agree with you guys. I like the Owls here. I think this is maybe a touch too high here for Tennessee. So I like them plus 5.5.
All right, let's move on to the final game on Thursday night. Gonzaga, UCLA, 9:45 Eastern on CBS. This game will take place at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. UCLA 2-point favorite over under 145.5. I cannot believe it's been it'll be 17 years to the day when these two teams tip off of the Adam Morrison crying game. And of course, everyone remembers a couple of years ago, the shot in the Final Four when Gonzaga got their revenge in overtime. So these two teams have had some classics. Spread is, close to a pick here. My initial thoughts on this game, I'm not as high on the market as Gonzaga. I do think, look, I think that they still have a fatal flaw that's going to catch up to them. That's their defense. They played a TCU team that wants to run, and I think that worked in favor of both of those teams. And you saw the game was played into the 80s. It was just a bunch of runs back and forth. And fortunately, Gonzaga didn't have to deal with Eddie Lampkin. But they're not going to be able to run here, and they're going to have to play in the half court. UCLA doesn't let you run, doesn't let anybody run. And again, I'll keep coming back to this, but more times than not, I'll side with the team that's more comfortable in the half court and likes to grind the game down to a halt, more so than the team that needs to get out and run. And this Gonzaga team, unlike a couple of years ago, their defensive metrics are very concerning. They obviously missed Chet Holmgren significantly from last year. Their rim defense is very suspect. Their post defense is very suspect. You can move Drew Timme around on the pick and roll and get him out of position, which I'm sure Tiger Campbell will do. So I'm going to trust these UCLA seniors to just make more shots down the stretch and exploit the Gonzaga defense more so than Gonzaga, who does have shot makers, and Timmy's amazing on offense. But I think that the weak unit again in this game is going to be the difference, and that's just going to result in UCLA's ability to get buckets when they need to late, which should be a highly competitive game. There are injury concerns for UCLA. They already lost their best defender in Clark for the year. Bona re-aggravated his shoulder. Singleton hurt his ankle, but I think Singleton and Bona are going to be fine. I mean, based on what I've seen on them walking to the bus and warm-ups and red, I think they're going to be okay. That's really important. Bona's clearly their best interior defender. He could give Timme some trouble. Singleton, if he's a little limited, it would hurt on the defensive end, but he would be fine as a spot-up shooter, which is his main role on the offensive end. But from what I've read and what I've seen, I think they're both going to be fine here. So I haven't played UCLA yet, but I'm leaning that way. Mike, let me get your thoughts here.
I kind of talked myself into and out of a play on Gonzaga to the point where I'm going to keep my money on the sideline. UCLA has won 14 of 15 straight up. Jaquez is shooting as well as he has in his entire career. And I think that's the final element of it for me, where it's like picturing him taking over and making 60% of his shots. I can see it. And as you mentioned, Gonzaga has so many liabilities on the defensive end that they're not going to put them in difficult positions. The pick and roll game, I think they're absolutely going to eat. So I'm actually leaning more towards the over. I understand that Singleton, they're saying that he's fine. But just my brain watching that injury in real time, I don't see it. And I understand that it's a defensive system. Mick Cronin has carried this defense with him his entire career. It basically was his launching pad to get to a premier job like UCLA. So it's not as though they're going to, morph into a defense that's in the 200s in metrics. But I do think in terms of being able to absolutely throw the shackles on the running game for Gonzaga, if Singleton isn't even 75%, that's my guess. I think he's going to gut it out and try his best to play. I think there's still going to be runs to be had for the Zags here. So I'm going to go over in this spot. I think 145.5 is just about right. But honestly, I think if Gonzaga can up the tempo even a little bit and move UCLA out of their comfort zone, there's an opportunity to fly past this number. And then finally, the reason why I was like a little bit leaning towards Gonzaga here is that they played Tommy Lloyd 3 times with Arizona, the same exact system, and they went 1-2 straight up. So from an apples to apples perspective, even when they were lower scoring games, UCLA ended up losing those. So the tiniest lean towards the Zags, and over 145.5 is my play.
Yeah, for what it's worth, also, Gonzaga ranks in the 16th percentile per synergy in transition defense. So if UCLA gets a chance to get out and run, you could see some success there, which would definitely help the over. It should be a really high competitive game. I'm not like, I could see arguments for both sides for sure. So let's, before we get on to Friday, let's go with our best bets for Thursday. BJ, I'll start with you. best bet for Thursday, Sweet 16?
I will go with UConn -3. I think they'll be able to take away a lot of the advantage that Arkansas has had in the first 2 rounds.
I'll go Florida Atlantic +5, and I think this line is a touch high after what Tennessee did to Duke last week. Remember, this is still an offense that's very limited now, laying 5.5 against a Florida Atlantic offense that can shoot. And they got multiple shooters, which is what you need against Tennessee, and something that Tennessee has rarely seen this year playing in the SEC. FAU can hit threes. They also will compete on the glass. Profile very similar to Missouri, who swept Tennessee. And FAU has a much better defense and is a much better defensive rebounding team. So give me the Owls. And I also agree with your UConn take. Mike, favorite bet on Thursday?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on the Owls. Let's go FAU, take the points. I'm going to sprinkle on the money line as well, and keep this funeral march alive for Tennessee. This is the team that just refuses to die, but at some point they're gonna fall with this offense, because they're gonna fall behind by 5 or 6 points, and it's gonna rear its ugly head that they are not playing a beautiful form of basketball on the offensive end. So I'll go with FAU.
All right, get the Hearst ready. Let's go Owls. All right, let's move on to Friday night, Sweet 16. 4 more games starting at 6:30 Eastern on TBS. Alabama, 7.5 point favorite, over under 137. I took the Aztecs here. I think this is a great matchup. Look, Alabama is arguably the most talented team in the country. I assume that Brandon Miller and then also Marcus Sasser, although they're groins, you never know with a groin, but they're playing on Friday. They also played on Saturday, so you get the extra day of prep and then played one day before, the benefit of being the 1 seed here. You got 5 days in between games. I'm assuming Sasser and Miller will be close to 100% for what it's worth. If you guys disagree, you can jump in during the analysis and let me know. But it is worth mentioning that groin could flare up and they might not be at 100%. But Alabama, arguably the most talented team in the country, they are. Nate Oates has embraced the analytical revolution. They shoot threes and they want to get to the rim. And on the other end, they force you to shoot mid-range jumpers. Right? They rank in the bottom 3 in the country in mid-range jumper percentage, and the top 3 in forcing opponents to shoot mid-range jumpers on the defensive end. Well, if there's one opponent who could match up with that profile, it's San Diego State. They are very good at defending at the rim, and they're an elite 3-point defense. They give up a bunch of threes, but they contest everything, and they're just long. And it's just always been the case with San Diego for the past couple years. It's similar to Houston. You can really trust their perimeter defense. And the other end, they have guards in Trammell and Matt Bradley specifically that can live in the mid-range, which is where Alabama funnels you to, and they can just get red hot. And then also, again, this is a team that wants to slow the game down versus a team that wants to speed it up. And I will trust a team that can slow it down. San Diego State pretty much slows down against anyone. That makes it tough to cover a number like 7.5. So, I think the San Diego State will be able to control the tempo here. I think their physicality and athleticism can match Alabama to a degree. And then just how they profile against that, rim and 3 mentality of Alabama, I think it's a decent matchup. I don't know if they have enough they don't have enough offense to win this game outright, but I do think that they can stay within this number. I also, have a lot of respect for Nate Oates and what he's done at Alabama. Obviously fully embraced the analytical revolution, but I trust Dutcher more as a game planner and game schemer to come up with some things here that might make a difference. For what it's worth, with 4+ days of prep in between games, he's 60% over the course of his career. I think 57 and 38 against the spread. So I think this is just a tad too many points with the Aztecs. BJ, I know you played this, so you agree here?
Yeah, I love the Aztecs +7.5. So the pace clash, like you mentioned, I think is very, very interesting in this matchup, because Alabama is 6th fastest in the country in terms of average possession length, 15.3 seconds. San Diego State on defense is averaging 18.5 seconds. That's 346th in the country. And if you look at the game against Charleston, who is a very fast-paced team, San Diego State held that game to about a 69 possession pace. And throughout Mountain West play, only one team pushed them above the 70 possession pace, and it was New Mexico. Alabama, obviously plays very, very fast, but, the game against Maryland was a blowout. So the possession, the pace was pretty slow at 67 possessions. But if you look at the SEC tournament, all three of their games were under 70 possession pace. So they have shown that they can be held under that slow type pace of game, which obviously favors San Diego State. And you mentioned, the analytical revolution. San Diego State is 8th in the country in open 3-point rate. So like you mentioned, they can test every single 3-point shot. So they, the fact they're only allowing 28.7%, it is legit because they don't allow a lot of open 3-pointers. And, the Aztecs offensively, like you mentioned, a ton of mid-range jumpers. They also do a ton of post-up sets, and they get to the free throw line at a top 100 rate, which is a big disadvantage for Alabama defensively because they are 222nd in the country in free throw rate allowed. And digging even a little deeper into Alabama's defense against mid-range jumpers, for the season, they're allowing 32%, but per shot quality, they're actually due for negative regression from the mid-range. They should be allowing around 38%. So I agree with you. I think the Aztecs can keep this game to a below a 70 possession pace and play it in the half court and really, they're a very, very physical team. So this is going to be a big time challenge for Alabama, who has kind of breezed through these first two games, and it's going to be a big time wake up call. So I like San Diego State to muck this game up, and I agree with you. I like them 7.5.
Mike, thoughts?
I'm going to go San Diego State money line for all the reasons you guys are laying it out there. Brian Dutcher, since 2018, has won as an underdog outright 40% of the time, which is the best in the Mountain West, 27th nationally. He's a great game planner. I think he'll have a great game plan to slow down this Alabama offense. And let's look at what happened when the Crimson Tide ran into a top 15 Ken Pom defense. They beat Houston by 6 in a lower scoring game. They lost to UConn by 15. They lost to Tennessee. My thoughts on Tennessee, by 9. They were lucky to win against Arkansas, beating them by 3 at home. And you have Brandon Miller coming into this game in this tournament, 5 for 22 from the field. So for all of the good vibes with that number 1 on the seed line next to their name on the Chiron, I think that they are vulnerable. I thought they were coming in. They got a nice draw in the first, weekends, and it was well deserved. But at this point, I think they're running into a team that is one big Matt Bradley performance away from winning this game outright. Has he done it this year? He gave Arkansas 23 in the Maui Classic, a game they went to overtime when Arkansas was 9th in the country. So he's capable of it. It's going to require that. But I think the value on the money line here is just too good to pass up. So I'm going to go with the Aztecs to knock out the third number 1 seed from this tournament.
Yeah, I would agree on the money line play. If you're looking for a money line dog in the Sweet 16, I think San Diego State is the obvious choice because the game does have a lot of variance, which is good for a money line underdog, and wider distribution of results because of Matt Bradley shooting, right? If he's hot, he could pull this game off, or he could shoot them out of a game. And then you have Alabama, who's going up against an elite perimeter D, but they're still going to get up their threes. So if Alabama is on one of their nights where they're hitting 58% from 3 and, they go 14 of 27 or something, well, guess what? They're going to win this game. So there's a lot of variance with the shooting on both sides. Like if Alabama's hitting their threes and Bradley's off, good night, Aztecs. If Bradley's red hot and Alabama's off, it could easily go down. So I love that call.
Real quick,
let's move.
a Florida Atlantic San Diego State money line parlay pays a little over 10-1. I might have to sprinkle that a little bit.
Oh, that does sound fairly appetizing. Let's move on to the second game on Friday night. Miami, Houston, 7:15 Eastern on CBS. Houston, the other 1 seed still alive, 7-point favorite here. Over under 138. Mike, let me throw it to you quickly first. Thoughts on this game? I guess there are injury concerns, but what we saw from Sasser, then 5 days in between, and then what we saw from O'Meara, dominated Indiana on the glass. I think these teams are going to be at full strength. Do you have quick thoughts here on this matchup?
Yeah, just when I jotted down my prediction for the spread and the total, I was dead on for the spread and a point off on the total. So I think this is very well calibrated. I respect Miami too much at this point in the season in terms of what they bring from their guards and the fact that O'Meara is healthy. I think he had 24 rebounds in 2 games, something like that. So he's giving them exactly what he needs from that like Dennis Rodman high energy, rebounding forward perspective. So for me, it's just a pass. I have some strong takes on a lot of these games. This is not one of them. I could see Houston flexing again because Miami, what they did against Indiana, it's a very nice win, and I think it puts a nice cap on their season, but has no bearing whatsoever in this game because I think Houston's a completely different animal, and the way that they just go on these runs and shut teams down, I think it's going to be too difficult for Miami to get over the hump from a money line perspective. And like I said, I think the spread here is just about dead on.
Yeah, I make the spread a tad higher, so I would lean Houston. Not enough to play it. Maybe I'll throw them in a money line somehow because I do agree. Look, Miami has one of those glaring weakness units, a defense with an adjusted efficiency outside the top 100, and their guards who are great, and that plays in March. And Larinaga a great coach, and we've seen that the last 2 tournaments with them. They made a run last year to the Elite Eight. Now they're in the Sweet 16 with a great backcourt. But there's only so many defensive rebounds that Amir can get in this game. And he is really the only true rebounder on the team. Houston should dominate the offensive glass, which is going to be a problem for Miami with that defense, right? They're not going to get many stops already. And if Houston's missing, they're going to get such a high volume of offensive rebounds, as they usually do, and easy putbacks. And we'll see if Amir can stay out of foul trouble as well. But those Miami guards, they really exploited Indiana's 2 primary weaknesses. You can bother them with pressure, and then they struggle on the perimeter defensively, and they really don't see elite quick guards in the Big Ten like Miami has. Well, that's not the case with Houston, assuming full health. So Houston isn't bothered by pressure, and they're not going to turn it over, and you're not going to just blow by that defense with those guards. So yeah, again, I think that the 1 weak unit here is the Miami defense, which will ultimately be the difference. Maybe Sasser's not at 100%, so I could get this line being a tiny bit discounted to where I have it. But I think Houston prevails. Spread and total, I would agree, are fairly fair. BJ, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this is maybe a chance to get Houston live if they go down again. Like, coming into this, like, what Houston team is going to show up? Is it the team that struggled against Northern Kentucky and for the first half of Auburn, or the team that just went berserk in that second half against Auburn? Like you mentioned, like on paper, this is a great matchup for them. They're a great offensive rebounding team. They run a high frequency pick and roll, which Miami really struggles defending. And what was interesting about Miami's win over Indiana is they got to the rim with relative ease. They scored 40 points at the rim. But against Drake, they scored 4 points at the rim. So that's a huge variance between those two. And Houston is a top 30 team in the country in terms of points per possession allowed at the rim. And they also defend the 3-point line at a top 5 rate as well. So it's a very interesting matchup to see how Miami is going to, score effectively. And Houston, overall, they did not shoot the ball well against Auburn. They just got to the free throw line 29 times and hit 24 of them, but they just went 7 of 22 from beyond the arc. Miami against Indiana, who is not a high volume 3-point shooting team. Miami allowed 11 open 3-pointers per shot quality, and Indiana just went 8 of 25 from beyond the arc. So Houston is, they're only hitting around 34% for the season from beyond the arc. They're not an awesome 3-point shooting team. So I'm going to wait and see if I can potentially get Houston at a better number live. But, it obviously wouldn't shock me if Houston came out and blew them out, given, like you guys mentioned, how bad Miami's defense has been this season.
Yeah, and again, another pace clash where Houston's going to strangle the game down. Miami prefers to get up and down in transition and run. You can't do that against Houston. So that's, I think, going to make it even tougher here. All right, let's move on to the 3rd game on Friday night, and that's between Princeton and Creighton. Creighton 10-point favorite here, over under 140. I know you guys don't really have strong opinions on this game. You think the line and spread is about right. I would tend to agree. If I had to play a side, I would play Creighton. Might throw them in a money line parlay. I think this is the end of Princeton's run. Look, over the first 2 games, they really slowed down teams that want to run and aren't comfortable in the half court. And they did a great job in doing so. They also dominated the glass, especially against Missouri, who's one of the worst rebounding teams in the country. You're not going to do that against Creighton, especially on the offensive end. Creighton's an elite defensive rebounding team. They also don't foul. They also run you off the 3-point line. It's hard for me to find the formula for Princeton here. to give them that edge to pull off another upset because Creighton just has so much more talent and athleticism, and Creighton's comfortable playing in the half court. So I just don't see Princeton continuing the run. Look, 15 seeds have gone 2 years ago. We saw the second 15 seed ever go to the Sweet 16. Last year, we saw the third and then go to the Elite Eight. Maybe that means we have a 15 seed going to the Final Four. I don't see it, but line seems about fair. Wouldn't be surprised if this comes down to shenanigans in the final minute to decide the cover. And you guys agree. So let's move on to the final game on Friday night between Xavier and Texas. This game's 9:45 Eastern on CBS. Texas 4-point favorite here, over under 148.5. I played the over here. I think that this line, talk about some recency bias. They had the change of ball last week. We had tight rims everywhere. And we saw that in that Xavier total. It came down like 6 points. I had to play the over on Sunday. I was very nervous to do so. Fortunately, against Pitt, it snuck over the total. I think that this total is, and I think a couple of these totals are reduced a bit. And this one is the one I'm most interested in because we have a lot of teams that want to run, but they're playing teams that want to slow it down. And like I said, I tend to favor the teams that want to slow it down. And I think that they have an easier time of making it the kind of game that they want it to be. But in this case, Texas is more than comfortable running up and down the court. It's kind of like in their DNA, and they have the guards to do it. I mean, they are 100th. They're 100th in adjusted tempo. Xavier, we know, wants to run. They're, I think, 33rd in the country. They could go up and down the court. They could score pretty much against anybody, but they have major issues on the defensive end, especially on the perimeter with their guards. And I think that Texas will be able to exploit it. Xavier will score, and this game will just be up and down. Both teams are more than comfortable in doing so. And if you go back and look, let me pull up the games. This game will be played at T-Mobile. We talked about rim unfamiliarity. Texas just won 3 games here to win the Big 12 tournament, same exact arena, for whatever that's worth. But if you go back to Texas, there are 4 teams. Of the remaining 16 teams left in the field, there are 4 that rank in the top 15 adjusted tempo: Alabama, Gonzaga, Xavier, and Kansas State. Texas played 2 of those 3 teams, combined 3 times. 2 of those games flew over the total. They beat Gonzaga 93-74, and they lost to Kansas State 116-103. They just had a coaching change that might explain some of the defensive issues. But I think this will be up and down, and both teams are going to be happy to run, and I see major advantages for each offense. So I think this game, I cannot see it not getting into the 70s with a pretty good chance of being played into the 80s. And then if needed, hopefully we get some fouls late. But I like the over here. I think the line's pretty fair. PG, I'll throw it to you first. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm starting to lean and agree with you on the over. So I was in the building for Texas Colgate, and what I noticed is that Colgate had a relatively easy time getting to the rim despite being undersized against Texas. And they ended up scoring 30 of their 61 points at the rim. They just could not hit a shot to save their life from outside the arc. And then Serge Barry Rice just got insanely hot from 3-point range. Well, then against Penn State, Texas goes 1 of 13 from beyond the arc. And
Penn State's a snail. Penn State wants to slow the game down incredibly.
Exactly.
They don't go if there are any offensive rebounds. They don't want you to in transition.
Exactly. There were not a lot of open 3-pointers in that game. Like you mentioned, the issues with Xavier, I mean, they're allowing close to 36% from beyond the arc this season. And how Texas ended up beating Penn State was they scored 32 points from the mid-range. They're obviously a very high-frequency mid-range team in the country. Well, Xavier is 317 in the country, defending from the mid-range, relying around 40% for the season. And the flip side of that is, like you mentioned, yeah, Xavier likes to run. They don't attempt a lot of 3-pointers, but when they do, they're hitting them at a top 5 percentage in the country. A lot of their offense is designed to get the ball down low, run through post-up sets, and they also are a top 100 team in terms of utilizing the pick and roll. And they're actually top 40 in the country in points per possession off of that pick and roll. Texas is a very average team at defending the pick and roll. Like I already mentioned, like they haven't been very good in this tournament at defending at the rim. So I think both offenses will have success. Like you mentioned, it's going to be a very up and down type game. So I tend to agree with you. So I'll probably end up taking the over as well.
Yeah, I mean, the perimeter defense of like Kunkel and Boom can really be exploited. Texas might be able to back them down too and post up, but they can't stop anyone from getting into the paint. And Texas is just a team full of tough shot makers. And they just can thrive in the mid-range and make tough shots, make contested shots, but especially if you're going to let them blow by you and pull up. And that's what I think they'll be able to do all game. Mike, wearing the burnt orange today, are you back in the horns here?
I am. I think I'm going to go with the parlay, them on the money line and over. You convinced me on the total. They're 6-0-1 against the spread in their last 7 games. The only push there was against Penn State, which is arguably the hottest team in the country. So that was a very impressive round of 32 win, in my opinion. And
it took a 4-point play late.
Exactly. So when you look at what they have from a roster perspective, the fact that Dylan Dessou has all of a sudden blown up, he's coming off back-to-back double-doubles, scored 28 against Penn State. I think it makes their offense operate at such a high level. I think you can argue that they're a top 10 offense right now, the way that they're playing because of that. And you look at the Xavier defense is 150th in effective field goal percentage allowed. I think Texas is going to be able to eventually pull away in this game, but I don't want to necessarily mess around with a backdoor or a situation where there's been some weird backdoors already in this tournament. The TCU Gonzaga one, I think, will live on forever. I'm just going to go ahead with the money line and parlay it with over.
Yeah, I think that in certain sense, we're still sleeping on Texas in a way. Dessou has turned into an absolute monster. And you're right. It could be one of those games where what's the glaring weakness? What's the glaring weak unit in this game? It's the Xavier defense, which ultimately could be the difference. All right, before we get out of here, let's go with our favorite bets on Friday night. I will start things off. I'm going to go with San Diego State. I think it's too many points against Alabama. They can defend at the rim with their elite length. They've been great contesting threes all year, and their offense can thrive in the mid-range. That's what you have to do against the analytical monsters of Alabama, who are just rim and three, and make you live in the mid-range. San Diego State, I think, could also control tempo here. I love the extra prep time for Dutcher, one of the best game planners in the country. I think this game will be played more at San Diego State's pace than Alabama's, who wants to get out in transition. I think over 18% of their possessions, they do so. San Diego State only allows teams to get out in transition around 12% of the time. So I think there's too many points. I'm going to ride with a dog here against the 1 seed. BJ, favorite bet on Friday?
I'm also going to go San Diego State at plus 7.5. I think they'll be able to slow the pace down. Alabama's shown throughout the SEC tournament that they can be slowed down. And like you mentioned, San Diego State offensively profiles so well analytically for what Alabama's weaknesses are. So I'm riding with you, and I like San Diego State plus 7.5.
Mike?
Just to add a little bit of creativity to the San Diego State play, I'm going to take them plus 7.5 and parlay it with Creighton money line. It's going to move it from minus 110 to about plus 135. So in terms of the plays that I really like, I believe San Diego State has a great chance to upset Alabama. So 7.5 makes me feel great. And then Creighton in general, I think they're going to be able to just run past Princeton because of what they're able to do on the defensive glass. There's not going to be extra opportunities for the Tigers that I think at this point they're finally in deep water and they're going to run up against one of the hottest teams in the country. So I'll go ahead and put those two together for a plus 135 payout.